I've lost my agenda.
She ought to do it at a reception, take credit for it.
Call this special workshop meeting of the Jacksonville City Council to order. We have a proposed agenda for tonight's meeting. It's one item dealing with public safety camera equipment, and I would entertain a motion at this time to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Richard, we'll turn it over to you at this time to introduce the speakers and the topic tonight.
Mayor, members of council, it's always good to be with you. It's hard to believe that December is upon us. We hope everyone was able to come out to the Winterfest this past Saturday. I believe I saw at least 4 of you sledding down with some children as the ice was really a fabulous event. Although Mr. Bittner was ice skating, I believe the rest of you enjoyed the sledding. So we did have probably 3,000 to 4,000 people come out for that. This evening we're going to continue a discussion which you began in May, and that is the issue of law enforcement and body cameras. We're very pleased tonight to have not only the chief but also Ronnie Dorn. Ronnie is going to give us an overview of research that the department has been doing for the last several months and looking ahead at what we will be accomplishing and recommending as part of your budget. So at this time I'll turn it over to the chief and to Ronnie.
Well, first I'd like to thank the council and the mayor for allowing us to present this. This is certainly a hot topic, as we all know, throughout not only North Carolina but the U.S. So what I'm going to do is basically just kind of give you some oversight of what we've done to this point and where we're at and what we'd like to familiarize you with. So when you look at some of the issues, you're looking at the utilization of camera equipment, law enforcement. Of course, as the city manager said, we presented this in May. We talked about it. The national discussion and perception. Of course, perception is, can be reality in a sense, but too many incidents nationally in which officers resort to the use of force. Okay, officers misinterpret the situation or aggression of a suspect. High number of citizen complaints against police officers. Officers making poor choices, and of course, bogus complaints. So those are just some of the things that we'll discuss. Community relations, a positive relationship, critical aspect of policing. Police relationships require trust of the people that we serve. Of course, that's a priority. And the community partnership helps police address crimes and disorder issues. So when you look at Jacksonville, because that's, of course, what we're going to discuss, in 2014, as a law enforcement entity, we had 74,796 contacts with members of our community. Out of those, it resulted in 4,075 arrests. And then if you break it down even further, officers used force on 48 incidences, resulting in 5 complaints. So out of that, we carry that over a little bit further, and you look at the national standard for the use of force, and when you look at the number of contacts we had compared to the force we used, that come out to 0.06. The national standard is at 1.4, so as you can see, we're well below that. I think we do a very good job of checks and balances within our own agency as far as training, how we monitor use of forces, investigate, any use of force by officers, as well as complaints. So when you look at actions taken by JPD, updated use of force training, we constantly review our guidelines and utilizations of force. Installed the use of force simulator. As you probably know, we've updated our prison system, which is the shoot, don't shoot simulator that gives you actual live scenarios. They can be controlled by the operator based on the officer's reaction to either make the individuals compliant or have them more aggressive. That's all controlled. And as well as that, we also updated that system for taser utilization. So, taser is also a big aspect of use of force. So we've implemented that as well.
Now that simulator is located out at the firing range?
No, sir, that's at the old training facility right there behind the police department.
Okay. So if any of the council would actually like to set up a time that they can come by and see that simulator and actually, watch a person perform that, we'd be very happy to set that up, either as a workshop or as an individual item. Just contact CMO or contact the chief.
Okay.
And like I say, it's a very good tool, and it's something the chief has pushed for because we bought the system a long time ago. And, we got some use out of it, but then it was updated and we started having issues. So when we implemented this new system, there was a lot of additional features, I think, that are very beneficial when it comes to officers and training. And of course, like I said, we evaluate our uses of force in the training on a regular basis, as well as we conduct the fair and impartial police training. Some additional actions: de-escalation training, crisis intervention training for engaging mentally challenged individuals. As you may or may not know, we deal with mentally challenged on a regular basis, and I think that's increasing daily. Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, we had how many incidents in 1 month where we dealt with the mentally challenged?
Well, we've looked at the hours that we spent on mentally challenged individuals over the last year, and that's 14,000 hours. So there's definitely some issues here. But I'd just like to take just a minute to talk a little bit about these actions, because the camera system is part of an overall strategy. And I think that's the important part, is when we look at what the perception is in our community, when we look at the perception in the nation, there's this perception that officers use force, and it is reality, that they use it on a very regular basis. The facts are that we don't use it on a very regular basis, but there is some room for improvement. Just like I said, we did 14,000 hours when we're dealing with those mentally challenged individuals. The crisis intervention training that we're talking about is a 40-hour training that gives officers the tools on how to de-escalate the situation. Because our goal is to transition from how we teach use of force based upon, here's the criteria that you operate in, use force in that time, to a de-escalation model. And that's where we're really moving toward, is that de-escalation model. And part of the updated use of force training and the updated use of force simulator is to train officers to de-escalate the situation. I think a lot of communities think that these cameras are going to be the panacea and they're going to prevent these actions from occurring, but I think they're going to be gravely mistaken unless they make it part of a more comprehensive strategy. And that's what we're doing. Is it's more of our strategy on how to reduce these incidents. Even though we didn't have a lot, I think there's an opportunity for us to learn from each incident, and to, from a de-escalation standpoint, work on that concept so that we can de-escalate the situation before we use force. And I think the incident in Chicago, the incidents that occurred where people were shot and killed by officers, a lot of those can be prevented if we use that de-escalation model as more of the model for use of force.
And as the chief was saying, if you've noticed, most of the actions taken by our agency have been other methods in order to try to reduce the use of force. And when we start talking about the crisis intervention team and engaging in the mentally challenged, that is just that. It's a challenge. A lot of times these people don't have the mental capacity to understand these commands. So we look for ways to deal with them and talk to them so that it doesn't result in the use of force. And a lot of times that's where it goes if the officers aren't trained correctly. So as the chief said, we've already had one training session on this where we trained 10 officers in November. We've got another one already scheduled for the week of January 11th where we'll train 10 more on top of the ones that we already have on staff that have been through this training. We've also sent Lieutenant White. She's been sent to a training course so that she can also train some of our staff in different methods. So currently this is the in-car camera system we're using now. I think we installed the first ones, not of this particular brand, but I came in roughly 1995, and Mayor Phillips, you may recall, I think we had two, and the two patrol cars that had the LED light bars that we tested. There was no method or madness at that time. It was a new topic. It was something they were testing. Officers had the VHS system in their trunk, and when the tape was full, you took it out. If there was nothing of importance on there, you just ran over it, or recorded over it, or whatever you needed to do.
But I think it's important to understand that we've used these cameras for a very long period of time, and these cameras are actually, as far as a camera system, give us a better overview. Will give us a better overview than the body cams will. And I think it's important because we are at end of life, end of service with the current system we have. So over the next couple of years, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on, is we will be transitioning into a new camera system because the old ones are end of life, end of service.
But you'll still have both, right?
Yes, I think that's the important part, Mayor, is that in order to get a good picture, for me, I would rather have the in-car camera than the body cam, because the body cams, as you saw from that last demonstration we had, they're very restrictive in the view that you get. The in-car camera is much more panoramic. Yes, sir. It does give you a much broader view of the entire situation. So we're going to continue to use those in-car cameras, and I think they've been very effective over the last the years that we've had them. We transitioned from the videotape to the digital
Hard drives.
and to the digital, and now we're moving to another generation of that digital cameras.
Do these cameras record sound as well as?
Yes, they do.
Both of them? Do the in-car and the one
Let me ask you this, Chief. I know y'all made some change, made a lot more changes since I left, but as far as your retention of your in-car video,
We're actually going to talk about that, but we retain, it depends on the particular video. When the officer, there's certain triggers, the officer turns his blue lights on, they automatically come on. His button on his belt, if he pushes it, it automatically comes on. There's other triggers that can be associated with that. We can do it for speed. If you go over 45 miles an hour, 55 miles an hour, the camera would automatically come on. So there's a number of triggers that you can set. Our policy right now is 45 days, unless somebody complains or unless it's a criminal case. And because of the volume, we have 90 patrol vehicles, and each one of them has a camera. That 45 days becomes an extreme load, and I'm sure Chris will probably tell you that that we've added memory for the last little bit. Not a lot, but we've been adding it generally on an incremental basis because we've been keeping a lot of those videos. So if somebody doesn't come in within 45 days and complain, then that video is disposed of. And that's the state's
What's the magic about 45?
That's the state's the state record retention law.
It's 30 days.
30 days. That's right. We added 15 days. I'm sorry. The state is 30 days. We added 15 days just for the simple fact that it makes it a little bit easier for us to manage.
I'm gonna ask you one more question, and then you continue with your presentation. The 45 days of retention, what kind of monetary value is that?
Well,
It depends on how many videos, how many officers, resolution of the cameras, so there's a lot of variables. But from a cost standpoint, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, I mean, basically, Mayor, one of the ways to look at it, while we've had the video cameras in all of our cars, we're estimating right now that if we equip all of our personnel with a video of the body cam, you're going to add somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000 to your budget, and that's not a one-time cost. While the purchase of the equipment is a one-time cost, although it recurs every 4 or 5 years, your annual budget just for retention is going to go up. Now, by the time that we have the next presentation, probably in late January or February, we will have the exact cost. One of the things we were going to talk about at the end, but you brought it up now, so we might as well talk about it. Carmen is the past president of the Clerks Association. Chris is the incoming president, as we've said before, of the IT Association. Mike is the incoming president a year from now regarding police. We're trying to get all of those groups together to meet with the state archives. Isn't that the name of the agency?
Yes.
Because we need to be more realistic on how long we need to keep these things. We're no longer talking about, if you pardon the expression, relatively inexpensive storage. When you get to the level of storage that we're now facing, there's a huge financial difference between keeping it 45 days or 90 days or 45 days and 15 days. I mean, if nothing happens on a shift, really? Keep it 45 days? I mean, These are the type of things that we don't have, the type of questions we don't have the answers for yet. But we have to engage the state and other agencies, and definitely the associations that we just talked about, because that final decision will make a difference on whether you're spending an extra $50,000 next year or an extra $250,000 next year. And once you make that decision, if you pardon the expression, it's a forever commitment, year after year, for that storage.
This camera for an officer for a 12-hour shift will probably be a gig per shift. So when you're talking about the number of officers we have, I mean, that's a tremendous amount of data. Charlotte Mecklenburg, they implemented their system. It cost them $1 million for cameras, but it costs them $2 million a year just for their storage fee. And theirs is a little bit different. Ours is 45 days. They're holding those for at least 6 months.
And there is no monies from the Department of Justice or from the state that helps with the degree of costing with the storage?
There is some money, and Mike's going to talk about that.
Okay.
I have a question. There's a lot that's been written on this subject, and part of some articles that I've read is the concern for officers being apprehensive to do their job because of these cameras. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't.
Only because of the reaction time or the particular situation and knowing they've got these cameras, and
I don't.
is there any apprehension that you feel may take place?
I just don't think we will see that. And I think the reason we won't see that is because of the fact that the in-car cameras have been around and they're just kind of like second nature to them. So the majority of instances that require us to view them, we're doing that now based on the in-car cameras. So I think from an officer standpoint, I think these body cams are not going to be anything really much different than what they have now.
Let me tag on that before you ask yours, but I think that what you'll see there is you'll see a limited amount of apprehension to begin with, just like we did with the vehicle cameras, just getting used to and having to wear that on your person. But I think, like you say, it's something that eventually will get used to. You know, there was a big fear about those in-car cameras, you know, when they first come out. But what we tended to find out was that, hey, look, that was more of a protection than it was a bane to your ability to do your job.
98% of the time, when somebody complains and we pull the video, the officer is exonerated.
If you look at the benefits, Ronnie, why don't you walk us through the benefits, because it really speaks to both sides.
I think it ties into what the mayor just said, is that, you know, so would we be adding this as another tool to sort of give the officers defense in their actions, and more so than actually aiding in any way to the
I think as far as increasing accountability, I don't see that, because I think it's already there. And I think as far as the cases, now some of those cases, you know, when they go into a home or they're doing an investigation, we may get some additional video that we don't already have, but for the most part, I think officers are fairly used to that, and they see the benefit because they're not, because of how many times they're exonerated. Once you pull the video and look at it, it usually speaks for itself. And even those criminal cases.
Yeah, we do have complaints that come in through the manager's office where somebody feels that their child was pulled over and that the traffic officer was rude to them. And I won't mention any names or locations, but less than a month ago, I had a citizen call and they were upset. Called Mike's internal affairs folks, pulled up the video. Absolutely, you could hear the voice. You could hear the tone of the voice. You could hear the discussion. Officer was absolutely not rude. We invited the father of that person to come in. And the father, after seeing it, said, well, I guess my son did not really tell me the truth. You know, I think what you'll find is that everybody benefits from documentation. The police officer benefits because it shows exactly what he did or did not do. The citizen benefits because it shows exactly what the citizen did or did not do.
The other thing too is it is a good training tool. You're able to get a lot of information by viewing some of those videos. I know that when we started using the in-car videos, we started looking at some of them, and we could pick out some officer safety issues that may need to be addressed, So there's advantages on that side also.
And Mayor, you are correct. As far as the apprehensiveness of the officers, I think it speaks volumes about our agency. The fact that when we started looking at this, they were jumping at volunteers to test it. A lot of them feel that, it's just one more addition to the tool they already have. And when you start looking at the use of forces and complaints, like you say, the in-car camera, while it captures so much, when they leave that view and they go into a residence and they end up having to apprehend somebody, effect an arrest, use force, while this, like Chief said, is not going to be the say-all on it, it may give you that little bit of insight to understand why the force escalated to where it did. And I think the officers are comfortable with that. And so some of the benefits, of course, on the previous slide, I'm sorry.
Well, I don't know whether you're going to cover this later or not, but you mentioned about the activation of the in-car cameras. Is there an activation for the body cameras, or is it full-time for shift?
Well,
Well, there's several aspects of that, sir. And first off, they can be set on triggers so that they activate at the same time your in-car camera would. Whether that's when you open the car door, activate your blue lights and things of that nature. They can be manually activated. And the one good thing about this, which we'll discuss in some of the benefits of this particular brand, is they have what's called a continuous recording. So in the event the officer encounters a citizen and it's a typical encounter and it's just general conversation, for some reason it escalated during this conversation and something took place, we can still go back for up to 21 hours and pull that video off this even if he didn't activate it. So it's kind of like that fail-safe.
But the camera is somewhat controlled by the officer, he can shut it down?
He can stop this recording, yes, sir, but it's covered in policy of when he can and can't. And the thing about this, it's going to fall into the same policy and procedures as our in-car camera, as well as the supervisors consistently review the in-car camera footage. So they'll pull it in, they may pull your tape today and just conduct a review of your traffic stops, your different encounters randomly, and they fill out a form that comes to the division captain for approval.
when we talked about that 45 days, what'll happen is, every time he pushes that button, every time one of those triggers operate, the camera comes on, okay? That video is stored for 45 days. Okay, but today, the officer's wearing this camera and something happens and he didn't push the button. The supervisor can download that camera and it's running continuously. So that camera is running continuously during the day unless, for that 21 hours. Tomorrow, it's gonna record over top of that. And that's a defense system so that if you have an incident and you forget to turn your camera on, or there's an incident that occurs that you didn't expect, you can pull it out of that camera.
I got a question.
How does that work?
Yeah, that's
It's kind of like the black box, it just keeps recording,
Right.
but you have to actually pull it, and the next day it just erases if
Right,
you don't
right.
have any. That's where the gigabyte per shift comes in
Right.
to play, because it's constantly recording.
Well, the gigabyte is just for the ones that they activated. Now, we're
Oh,
not talking
okay.
about that. That's why for that 12-hour period, that camera is operational, but it only
actually pretty
saves
good.
it only saves those videos for 45 days when we push the button, unless we go back, at the end of the shift and download all the data that's on that
It
camera.
may redefine that whole thing about reasonable expectation of privacy if that's running in the background, won't it?
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing, Mayor. You have to go through a specific method to download the continuous recording, and that's for emergency situations.
But it can be done.
It can be
And
done,
that
yes,
gives
sir.
you that tool that,
And let's just say you had an officer out, and for some reason you got a shots fired call, and you respond, the officer's on the ground. We can take that camera, even though he didn't activate it for whatever reason, and pull that video.
So to clarify again, the camera's running whether the officer does anything or not. On the other hand,
Yes, sir.
if he wants something recorded, for example, he is passing a parameter, he's getting out of his car because of an incident, the system will automatically save that tape that is already running. That's what you're saying. Or the officer can tap it and make sure it's saved. So, you know, I know it gets a little confusing as to when it's running and when it's not. The reality, from what I'm hearing, is it's running all the time.
Yes, sir.
It only saves past so many hours, it only saves what the
The officer
parameters.
downloads.
Yeah.
Correct.
If I turn that camera on right now and I walk around and I do the video and then I turn it back off, that we'll keep that record for 45 days. If I just walk around with the camera on, I can download that at the end of the 21 hours. But if I don't, it's going to be gone.
One of the things that you're going to see in a minute is the policies, because as Mr. Bittner has asked, you know, when is the officer allowed to turn things on and off? Well, there are policies that have been in place for many years, and we're going to get to that to talk about when you as an officer can do certain things. So you see the benefits. Are there other benefits that are in the
Well, let me back
presentation?
up a second. That continuous recording, even though it's not activated, that's not subject to the records retention?
No.
Okay.
No, sir, like I say, that's an emergency
fail.
situation, and it's a whole different process. Okay, so we've discussed some of the benefits, provides a record of interrogations, arrests, documents what officers witnessed at a scene, like for example, when they enter a residence or walk away from the view of their in-car camera. And then, of course, we have our policy, which covers both our in-car camera and would cover this one as well. So some of the challenges, as we've discussed already, is the sharing of information, the use of the cameras, operational issues, situations which the officers would be unable to record, who and what should be recorded, when do officers hit record, when do they hit stop, and are there exemptions to the recording. So all that's covered in our policy. And for example, you know, we talk about when should they stop the recording. Well, our policy states you don't stop the recording until the situation's complete. And I'm going to be totally honest with you, when you walk into the courtroom now for a case, they expect to see video most of the time, and if there's not video, they want to know why. And so the last thing we want is officers going in there and the video stopped in the middle of the scene, because until, say if we effect an arrest, until we release that prisoner to the jail facility, ultimately there are responsibility and other situations can arise. So we do not stop that recording until they've been turned over to the magistrate or the detention facility, and the officer come back out to their car and they stop the recording. That prevents something else from occurring while they're at the jail, and then us having to explain, well, why did you stop the video? In this situation, this policy, because they can stop and activate this one on their own, it's the same policy. The only difference is say if you're interviewing a witness and they don't want, for whatever reason, for the fear or whatever, they can request that you do not record them, and that's to be caught on the camera, and then it's noted by the officer, you know, that at the witness's request, this recording will be stopped. As well as our policy will also cover in the event that officers are going to stop it after they're done with that event, they'll make that same announcement that the event is concluded and we're going to stop the recording.
Is the officer required to inform the person he's talking to that this is being recorded?
If we're dealing with witnesses, as far as like victims and witnesses, then we would notify them, yes, sir. And then, of course, we looked at, when we started reviewing this, we looked at, situations like hospitals, when, an officer goes in there to take a report and things of that nature. So that's all stuff that we would, some of that would have to be officer discretion, but you don't want to be recording in a hospital room where they're discussing medical issues and other such things. Of course, the public space versus private space, car cameras versus body cameras, storage issues, and retention period. We talked about our retention period. Those are the different methods in which we could store the video.
Let me give you, one of the challenges of using this is really the training of the officers versus the rights of the individual. If a man and, let's say a man and his wife are out in front of City Hall and they get into a domestic argument, they're in public space. If they're in their house, they're in private space. There very different rules have to come into play as to a domestic argument that's occurring in public space. You can record it all day long. When you get inside someone's house, there are certain rights that person has. That's why as we go through the policies, your city attorney is going to be very, very active in reviewing all the policies. We're going to be discussing with the North Carolina League of Municipalities and other municipalities, their policies. You know, Mike has had good policies with our department on the use of the car cam. But you don't take a car cam into someone's bedroom, at least not intentionally. And that's why, you know, this is really an update that shows you some of the challenges. The challenge is not what piece of equipment to buy. That's the easiest part of the puzzle. The challenge is, when do you use it? When do you let the officer have discretion?
I have a question. You said Charlotte Mecklenburg is using these?
Mm-hmm.
How long have they been using them?
I think they've used them probably for the last year. It's relatively new since Ferguson. It's really relatively new.
How have they adapted? Do you have any?
No, I mean, I don't know. I haven't heard anything about what they've been doing, but I mean, a lot of states have had some significant issues with the privacy issue. In North Carolina, we actually have been, from the state level, we've been working on whether this would be public record or not. And right now, we hold that it's not public record because it's part of what we use to evaluate the police officers. That has not been challenged in court. It's been some of the newspapers have said that they're going to challenge it in court, but it has not been challenged in court at this time. So right now, this is not subject to the public records law right now.
But you can use your own discretion when somebody requests it, i.e. the dad coming in.
We can release records. We can release records. You know, and the council has the right to release some records as well. The council can decide sometimes if a record that's not subject, a personnel record, is subject to the community. So like if we had a particular shooting and the council decided that they wanted to release that particular video, it could be released. But it would have to be a council decision to do that.
I think one thing people need to understand too is that cameras are a good tool, but they are not a panacea of.
Most people think that you're going to see it like it's on TV, and that's not what you're going to see. It's going to be very jumbled. It's going to be very difficult to see. And a lot of these cameras that have been used in a number of these incidents have been very difficult to determine actually what happened because, you know, the officer's rolling around in the ground. He has his arms in front of it. It's a low light situation. So there's a number of things that.
Still requires thorough investigation,
regardless
of what the camera is seeing.
And I think, yes, you're right. And I think from our standpoint, moving very slow on implementing these body cams is really, I think, prudent in this case. I don't think we need to be rushing into it. I know a lot of agencies have rushed into it and bought those body cams and then gone back and tried to figure out all the pieces of the puzzle to put them back together. And, you know, that's been a difficult thing.
When we had the North Carolina League of Municipalities meeting back in October, there was a session on this, and I sat in on that session. It had the state president of the ACLU, who was an attorney for them. It had the deputy chief of police of Greensboro. It had, I believe, one of the academicians who had studied this issue. What they all agreed on was this: the cameras by themselves don't do the cameras unless you have the proper policies. You have to have training, you have to have the policies in place, and then you have to decide on the equipment, and then you have to decide on storage. That it's a multi-phase thing. And what all four of them, including the person from the ACLU, said, they endorse the concept, but they do not endorse departments simply running out and buying equipment until you have the policies and the training squarely in place. And that's the approach that we're taking. Ronnie?
And while we continue, what I'll do is I'll pass this around. This is the camera that we're actually looking at. Just since we started testing these body cameras, there's already been several upgrades and things of that nature that go along with them.
Just
Mr. Thomas
feeling
wants
the,
one for council.
I'm just feeling the weight of that thing. You know, I don't know how much weight all the patrol officers carry, but that's another pound or so added to.
You're right, it
Added
is.
to it, and it's bulky, and it's gonna be,
Well, I mean, when you talk about a taser, you talk about a portable radio, you talk about extra ammunition, I mean, and it is.
it's another,
You're right.
another thing to,
And it's gotta be charged, obviously, every
Yeah.
night.
Yeah.
All the
Yeah.
time.
that's right, electricity costs going up.
Some of the additional challenges and policy discussions was, of course, who can access the video. In this situation, one thing about, I'll kind of jump ahead a little bit, one thing about the watch guard system is it's protected. One of the things you have to look at when you start talking about using this video for evidence or internal investigations is whether there's been anything tampered with it. WatchGuard's got a fail-safe in that in the method in which it's downloaded, if you're not using the wireless, you're using the dock method or the USB method to download this video, it comes with like a USB drive or a dongle. Let's say the officer decided he was going to take that dongle and take it home and try to erase it. The minute he plugged it back in that system, it's going to re-download anything that hasn't been cleared by supervision. So it's got a fail-safe to prevent anything like that from ever occurring.
Yeah, you can't Photoshop it, in other words.
Correct. They would have, as far as officers, they would have no access to tamper or alter this video.
You know, there's one of the incidences was some missing video. Now, so, you know, did the officer do it or did somebody in admin do it? You know, and did one of the supervisors? So, I mean, I guess we still have that issue that one of the supervisors could do it on their own.
Well, that's one of the policies that we're going to have to look at, and that is, when it comes to the body cam, who is allowed to download information? And I will also say at this point that there will come a point in the process that we're going to have to look at personnel. Easily, this is a full-time job to manage it, because just because you say that you have, just because you say you have a 45-day retention policy, that doesn't mean you're actually doing anything in 45 days. We know that to implement this, we're going to have to buy equipment, we're going to have to buy storage. We already know we're going to have to add at least one employee, simply for managing the data. You're talking about 90 officers every day of the week, 365 days a year, all the cars. That doesn't happen with Chris and IT. It doesn't happen with Carmen and the clerk. I mean, we are embarking upon a program that is extremely important for the public. It's extremely important for the police officer, but it is not a free program.
So we're saying we're gonna have records of every contact, the 74,000 something contacts annually? Is that what we're shooting for?
No, we're not shooting for every single contact.
Okay.
But, and that goes into the policy. He's going to talk a little bit about the policy, because there are certain mandates. If you have an arrest, if you think somebody's going to complain, if you're on a traffic stop, so there are certain things. But if the officers are, say, they're, you know, like they're doing now, during the holiday task force, they're out in the mall, they're talking to individuals, those won't necessarily, they won't be using this to do those contacts. So there's a lot of contacts, you know, somebody whose car might have been broken down or something like that. You know, the officers are not, there's certain criteria that they're going to use, and that's part of that policy.
Okay, of course, like we've discussed,
Let me interrupt you.
Yes, sir.
Well, the tasers, they have cameras on them also, right? Is it?
They do have taser cameras, but they have been less than effective as far as because basically by the time you turn them on, the incident is pretty much over. So we actually have money to replace those taser cams that's still in our budget that we're going to apply toward this, because the taser cams have not been very effective.
They just show, all they do is show the results of the shot,
Right.
taser shot.
Yeah, when the officer turns off the safety, then the taser cam would come on. And what we found is the information that we really needed,
Before.
yeah, the incident before wasn't on it. So they're not as effective as we'd hoped they'd been.
And there's actually been situations that the taser cam, because of the delay, looked worse, made the officer look like he tased individuals that were walking away. Fortunately, we had other video that showed the whole scenario. So of course, we've talked about public record versus privacy and what privacy issues are involved, such as residents, hospital rooms, things of that nature. When to record it continues as far as every interaction with a member of the public. Records should be discretionary and prohibited for some situations. And then, like we said, privacy versus documentation. So we're looking at the current equipment that we've had for some time. I also manage fleet, and it's getting to that part of it where the current company that that we've been utilizing for several years is revamping their whole system, and we're starting to have issues with our current equipment. I think last month alone, I had to send 4 of our heads back that you monitor this system on. So we're getting to that point where we're going to start spending a lot more money just to keep them functionable. Another thing that we were looking at is as we replace our old patrol cars with new ones, that would be the time to start implementing the in-car cameras with the new system. Of course, our challenges continue when you start talking about data storage, retention, and disclosure. Where to store it, and we've talked about, you can do the server-based or you can do a cloud-based, and the expenses, the privacy issues, the state laws that mandate it, and of course the transparency, releasing the release policy as far as who we're going to release it to and when, and storage capacity and cost. And as we've made that clear, that's not cheap.
It's not just storage, it's also backup of the storage, isn't it?
So during this evaluation, we tested several cameras, and the watch guard is the one that through several officers testing, we made videos of the various types of cameras that they were utilizing. We got feedback from the officers, from the supervisors, and we did that on all aspects as far as the efficiency, the methods in which they were utilized, the methods in which they downloaded, and of course overall functionability. So the recommended equipment in this case, of course, is WatchGuard, and that's the camera I just passed around. And some of the features that I'll tell you about and some of the reasons that we support this system is the in-car camera and the body camera have integration. So if we decided to go with a different camera, their body camera does not sync with their in-car camera. And to make that a little bit maybe simpler to understand, if we went with WatchGuard, an officer gets out on an event and his in-car camera is recording and his body camera is recording, this system will integrate that when they download. So the supervisor will be able to pull up that event and both videos will be there. With the other systems, that's not an option. So you would have to find the 2 separate videos and put them in a file together. This camera actually has an HD resolution with a 130-degree wide angle. If you look at this camera, you'll notice that this lens will rotate up or down depending on where you're wearing it on your body. That also assists the officer in making sure that they've got a clear view depending on where they're wearing it. I kind of told you a little bit earlier about the continuous recording ability of this one. So in those dire emergencies and unforeseen situations, we do have the ability to pull that video recording off. This camera as well had a longer battery life. They're averaging about 10 hours of continuous use, which is more than any of the other cameras offered. They have a stabilization feature and angle lens, which I just mentioned the lens, but as the chief told you earlier, depending on what the officer's doing, that video may be very shaky. This camera had one of the best stabilization features to kind of level that out and make the video visible or viewable. And of course, durability. Then you look at the fact that it does require significant storage, as all of them do. So here's where we start talking cost. For the body camera, each body camera is roughly $895. Now, that's the suggested retail price. That's before we do any negotiating with the manufacturer, the retailer. So you're looking at each one of those. If you bought them for 90 officers, you're talking about just for the body camera, $80,550. If you look at WatchGuard's in-car camera, each one is $4,995. So when you look at equipping all 90 cars, you're looking at a total of $449,550. And then when you look at the total cost for if you do one officer with their body camera and their car, as you see, it's $5,890. And then to do all our patrol vehicles with both, you're talking about $530. I mean, I'm sorry, 530,000, yes.
Yeah, we can do
It would be a deal, wouldn't it?
I thought maybe you had the manager do those things.
That Clemson man.
Yeah. So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I have a question. Since our police department have a wonderful collaboration with Camp Lejeune, is there anything that their police department or their MPs needs to know as we're still working together? Do they utilize these body cameras as well, or is that something that they're currently not doing?
They don't have body cams, and they have been working on the in-car cameras.
Okay.
So but they don't have body cams at this time.
Is asset forfeiture funding through the federal government, is that eligible funds to pay for some of this, to allay some of the costs?
It is, and there's grant funds. In fact, the next slide shows there's actually two mechanisms right now within the state. One is non-competitive, so we could ask for $100,000 right now for a third of the cost. So if we wanted to invest in say the storage and some of the infrastructure, we could do that on a non-competitive state legislative grant. Now the criminal justice improvement grant, we could ask for 100%. The problem with that grant is it's very competitive. So there's two grant opportunities right now for us to look at. If we, we're going to talk about a couple options or implementations. I think that we would look maybe at the state legislative grant to at least look at applying and getting some funding to start the program. Whether some of it's going to be used for storage, some of it's going to be used for at least the in-car cameras and those replacement cameras.
Criminal justice is federal?
Those are both. The state grant, the criminal justice improvement grant, is flow-through money from the federal government, but it comes from the Governor's Crime Commission.
And we say it's very competitive. What does a community have to show in order to be competitive? That they have a high crime problem, or what?
No, well,
what
it's
do we
just
have to do?
it's just how you write the grant, and basically right now it's going to depend on needs. They're going to look at how you write your needs, whether your needs are because we lost funding, we did whatever that might be. They're going to look at those needs, and you could say, well, we had more use of force complaints, or we had more community concerns than other communities might. I mean, some communities might have a large crime problem where they're having problems with part of their community. That could be used to justify that particular grant.
And the reason why I'm stressing that is that I would assume that a community that has a higher crime rate would be more competitive. Now, I recognize it's how you write the grant to explain that. We're very fortunate that if you look at the crime statistics in Jacksonville, in almost every category, our crime is significantly down. So the reason why I'm stressing that is, from the council standpoint, I think you can count on getting the first part because it's non-competitive. The rest of the money is going to have to come most likely from local sources. Now, Mayor, you mentioned the source, Mike. Is that the confiscated funds? Is that eligible also?
It is an eligible expense from those funds.
How about burn funding? Do you still get that?
That's burn funding is that criminal justice improvement grant. But I can tell you that we did apply last year for the federal grant, and part of which I was happy that they recognized this, is because we didn't have issues in our community, they didn't give us the grant. They're looking for communities that have issues between the police department and the segment of their community We didn't have that. So we couldn't justify that based upon the grant process.
And Mayor, also remember, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, this past year there was a ruling by the Attorney General, the federal Attorney General, that changed the confiscation money and how much we kept.
Right.
So
So it may
review.
not be that may not be there for us.
No,
As far as the amount. Yeah.
Right, not the way it was before. We used to have a significant amount of money come from those seizure funds, but the federal government changed the way it did that and basically prevented the U.S. Marshals or the FBI or the Secret Service or whoever that organization that would adopt the case, the ability to adopt those cases. So the seizure, if a police officer seized money that was involved in a drug case, then it has to go to the school system because all seizures and forfeitures go to the school system.
Those are all state forfeitures.
Mm-hmm. It really limits our ability to use the federal statutes to seize that money.
But in the end, we will bring back additional recommendations that will show you how much it's going to cost, how we're going to implement it, and where the funds are going to come from.
I think, you know, and then again, the thing that should drive it is whether or not this is going to be an effective venture.
Right, I mean, we haven't decided to do this, have we, or is that, I mean, I heard a request.
This is
Well,
a decision that you as a
yeah.
council have to make that decision.
The thing that we have to do is we have to replace the in-car cameras. I think that's now whether we supplement it with these or not is a question that I think we need to continue to look at and start to decide exactly what we want to do as far as moving down this path. Because once we go down this path, we're going to have to eventually, and you know, the real part that bothers me about this is that this technology in 3 years is going to be obsolete.
Exactly.
You know, so we're going to end up using this kind of technology, and it's really going to be obsolete. So I really appreciate you giving me the flexibility to do this in a very slow, methodical manner, because just in the time that from May to now, the technology of this has changed to synchronize those cameras, which is something we wanted to happen. You know, so that you could watch the in-car camera and the body cam simultaneously and kind of see what's going on, which couldn't be done before. So, you know, what's going to happen in the next 6 months? What's going to happen in the next 8 months? So this slow process, I think, and you might go to the other slide.
It's gonna get there.
We may lay out $500,000 and in 2 years, there may be a new camera come out the size of a credit card and the weight of it.
Yeah, it's gonna get smaller and lighter, no question.
You know, we talked about that we could do this in a 1-year implementation, which would cost us about $500,000. But our thing is if we decide to do it, that we go with some kind of incremental implementation.
At this point, as I said, this is really an update. We wanted you as a council and obviously the public to realize that we are researching this. A lot of questions still need to be answered. Funding is just one of them. But as you can see, there are a lot of issues here. Our pledge to you is we're going to thoroughly research this. We will bring this back to you in future workshops as we get additional answers. Are there other questions that you'd like to have of either Ronnie or the chief?
Is there an approximate timetable for action?
Well, we have to have the budget, as you know, it's not that many weeks away from us actually beginning the budget process. Actually, tomorrow we have our kickoff meeting with the staff to begin to review with them the rules of next year's budgeting. When you see the budget, which, Gail, they will actually see it in the first workshop in April, maybe late March. So there is that time period. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to, if we don't have all the answers by that time, then we're going to tell you what we do know, and we're going to decide at that point, you know.
Okay.
So definitely an update in 3 months.
But there is we will have to replace those in-car cameras. And our goal is to use to use this kind of technology to start to replace those.
Well, you can budget that in pieces though, right, with the in-car cameras also?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to have this all in one package.
No,
in your
actually,
budget.
this would have, the replacement of the in-car cameras is a budgeted item. We already have the money to do the new
We're
cars
gonna do
because we
that
had to
regardless
replace
of
them.
what we do right now on the body cameras.
Right. So,
With the cars,
Right.
as you change cars.
yeah, as we change cars, we'll replace, those cameras we'll replace with the WatchGuard in-car camera.
But you're gonna see, WatchGuard's competitors are gonna do this, they'll start doing some of the same features, you know, whatever they see as an advantage for sales, so.
Right.
So, but you're gonna be committed to WatchGuard at least, and there may be some point in where the systems eventually might end up being compatible,
Yeah.
regardless of whether you have a,
You're
you
right.
know,
you're right.
something, another, one sort of a body cam and another in-car.
And I think that the reason that we're having this discussion today is to give you that understanding, but also to make you understand that as we move forward with the in-car cameras, it's kind of like we are going with this product right here, because that's the best that we found on the market right now.
Right now.
Now, next
Yeah.
year, I don't know what's going to change, and the year after, I don't know what's going to change. We may buy one set of cars with the WatchGuard cameras and come back with something totally different the next year.
Mr. Warden, though, you make a good comment about the fact that at some point there's going to be what we call standardization. If you think about the radio system, there was a time that if you bought Motorola, then the only walkie-talkies that you could buy were Motorola. Today, you can buy the Motorola backbone, but you're any number of handheld devices that don't have to be Motorola that are now compatible. But that was because of changes at the federal level that required that. We are early into this program as a nation. There are going to be a lot of changes from the policy standpoint that come out of the Justice Department and probably out of others.
One of the reasons why those are so expensive, because they're proprietary for one, there's not a standardization. Number two, they know they have a limited life, and so they're trying to get all their R&D costs out. You know, they just, you know, it's just changing so fast.
Right.
So.
And they're actually not overly expensive. That's not where the expense is.
No,
And
no,
so,
you're exactly
I mean,
right.
really, for the camera itself, it's, you know, the $800 and some odd dollars. It's
And that
not
was-
significant compared to the 5,000 in-car, but that's, for these, the expense is afterwards. The storage, the personnel,
Does WatchGuard get into the storage?
Mhm.
So
They have
they're,
a-
so that's where
That's
they,
where money is.
they probably, you know, you hope at one point it's like the phone system, they'll give away the cameras in order to get the storage business. So.
And you know, and you're exactly right. I mean, that's why I think those cameras are, I mean, I think they're relatively cheap, $895. They're relatively cheap because if they can sell you the storage, you're gonna spend more than that $895 per camera on the storage. Yeah. And it's gonna be a recurring cost. Every single year, you're gonna be paying for that storage.
I have a question. John, you haven't sort of chimed in to any of this.
I've been writing down my questions to talk to the chief after the
Okay, good.
presentation.
Okay, so there are some questions
Oh, I have some
that you
questions.
have, and that's good. You know, obviously, it's a big topic in North Carolina, so.
And one thing on the storage, because we know that is important, one benefit, and I'm saying this from just looking at the reviews and listening to the officers and watching the videos, the one benefit to WatchGuard is the amount of technology that they've already put into both their in-car and their body cam. One of the things, two features that WatchGuard stands out above all the rest of the in-car cameras. One is they also have a wide-angle view. So just from there, where we would normally see a certain percentage of degree in front of the patrol car, they've broadened that spectrum on their visibility to almost to the sides of the windshields. The other thing is that WatchGuard allows, when they go to download, say if they do a DWI traffic stop, and during that traffic stop, the guy drops a bag of cocaine or something. WatchGuard has enabled when the supervisor goes to download it, he can determine in what definition he wants to save that video. So they may choose that one because of the feature of him tossing a bag of drugs down to save in high def, but the others can be saved in a standard format, which saves storage space.
Basically, would allow them to zoom in at a pretty close
It'll be a lot clearer, high
Clearer
definition
at a
video,
zoomed
so that
in.
you can see what he
Yeah.
drops and be able to articulate that that was the bag of cocaine they dropped, compared to just the average DWI where they're standing in front of the car doing field
It's just
sobriety,
pixels.
can be a standard format.
Good presentation.
Mayor, that concludes the items we had for tonight's workshop, unless you have other questions of Ronnie or the chief.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Some good information
Good
for us to
information.
think about there, and we look forward to hearing more about it. Plus, I'm going to try to read up a little bit more on it too. But thank you very much. And with that, does anybody have anything else?
Move we adjourn.
Second.
Motion and second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
If you could.